Calling all pug lovers. Fashion is going to the dogs, and we mean that in the best way possible. The Pugs and Stripes collection is shaking up the pet fashion world with a first of its kind clothing line designed specifically for pugs, and it's on sale now. From perfect pug friendly fits to eco friendly fabrics, this collection is more than just cute, it's comfortable, practical, and sustainable. And with hundreds of pugs helping shape the designs, it's truly fashion by pugs for pugs. So get your dress or t-shirt over at pugparties.com now. Hello, Hoomans and Puggies. Welcome to the Pug Life show, brought to you by Pug Parties, because your pug deserves to be the best dressed at the party. And you can check out their Pugs and Stripes collection at pugparties.com. I am your host, Donna, and with me are my puggy co-hosts, Rosie and Kenji, with their rescue foster brother, Buster. And speaking of Buster, the blind rescue pug, today's episode is all about our pawsome foster boy and the incredible journey we've shared so far. Buster is the first blind pug I've ever had the honour of living with, and let me tell you, it's an eye-opening experience in all the best ways. From learning how he navigates the world to understanding his needs, it's been a truly special and educational experience. In this episode, I'll share Buster's story, what it's really like to live with a blind pug, and offer some tips for others who might be on a similar path. Because as we all know, every pug is unique, and the Pug Life is all about living it together, one tail wag at a time. But before we zoom in, I want to remind you to subscribe to our newsletter in the show notes so you get advance notice of our next episode and much, much more. Now, for those that follow us on our socials, as well as the Pugcast, you'll be aware that we foster rescue pugs whenever we can. And we are currently fostering Buster, the blind rescue pug. Buster is our first blind pug, and although I have known other pugs who are blind, we've never cared for one ourselves, so we had a steep learning curve to make sure that his transition into our fur family was as smooth as possible. But before I go into what I've learned from living with Buster, I'll give you a little bit of a background on this senior snuggle pug. You can see all of his history on his Pug Rescue and Adoption Victoria page, which is linked in the show notes. As of the recording of this episode, Buster is still available for adoption. He has very specific needs, but I know that his forever family is out there somewhere. Now, Buster came to Pug Rescue as an unreclaimed stray in a country pound/shelter after having been used as a breeding dog for years. He underwent desexing, mast cell cancer removal, and a dental immediately. Thankfully, Buster's cancer has healed up, and lab results show it was a lower grade mast cell cancer with clear margins, thank God. Buster is also on some special eye drops to help make his eyes more comfortable, and he has regained some light-dark differentiation. So sometimes you'll see his head sort of flick in your direction as you're moving around the house, which is really nice. It sort of gives him something. But that's all we can hope for in the long term. Buster is also going deaf, but that appears to be more of an age-related decline and not something that's been instigated by some sort of medical or incident-related situation. Now, all these health issues point towards a life of neglect, noting that the dental, tumour size and eye issues could have been avoided if Buster had been to see a vet when the easily identifiable signs started to show. It's not difficult to smell tooth decay on a pug's breath. It's not difficult to notice a lump forming on their belly, nor is it difficult to notice that he's rubbing his eyes constantly. I think what angers and disappoints me the most about Buster's health issues is that he was used for breeding and therefore his previous owner made money from him. But they couldn't use some of that cash to invest in his basic health needs. If they'd done something about his dry eye alone when it first presented, he wouldn't be blind. He'd be on eye drops for the rest of his life to manage the condition, but he wouldn't be blind. Okay, enough of my soapbox. It's time to share with you the wonderful world/pug life we've shared with Buster since he arrived in September last year, just in time for Pug I've. If you happen to catch some of Buster's and my dance moves in preparation for the Pug Monster Ball. Now, the one thing that surprised me about Buster from the day he came to live with us was his adaptability and his intelligence. He's very smart. He figured out how to use the doggy door overnight with the help of Andrew and I showing him the way first a few times. And then he's following Rosie and Kenji in and out as well. We've had fosters who needed a lot more training before they got the hang of it. He figured out the basic layout of the house in the first day. We did close bedroom doors so that he could sort of slowly take things in. Didn't want to overwhelm him all in one hit. And he also figured out how to use the ramp up to the couch with a little guidance from Andrew and I again within about 3 days. Buster did prefer to just jump up and down himself, but with his hip dysplasia, we didn't want to encourage him to do any further damage if we could help it. So we encouraged the use of the ramp, and he now uses it as his preferred method of couch to floor transition. Now, all of these early signs gave me the impression that he was accustomed to using a doggy door and was allowed to be on the couch, a blet through jumping up and down. So we can extrapolate that he wasn't confined for long periods of time and he had some comforts and freedoms in his last home. But what I have really learned since Buster arrived on our doorstep with his cuddly little face and very deliberate walking style is, and it's probably the best piece of advice that I've found during my initial very hasty research, because you don't always get a lot of notice when you're getting a new foster, and they're not usually blind. That piece of advice is that it's the humans in the house that need to do most of the accommodating and not the other way round. What I mean by that is you need to become more aware/present, and you'll need to change your routines and habits to suit their specific needs. I have to admit, I lost count of the number of times I ran into Buster in the first few days because I'd be doing something and then I'd suddenly change direction because I remembered that I needed to do something else or I'd forgotten to grab something. And because he'd be walking so close to my heels, I didn't realize he was there. And so then, of course, I would change direction and run straight into the poor bugger. And when you think about it, Rosie and Kenji can see me changing direction and hop out of the way pretty quickly usually, whereas Buster can't and obviously won't. Thank God I was never carrying anything heavy or hot or anything else like that. So there was no damage done. No pugs were hurt in the making of this podcast. I also got a very big slap upside the head from the universe, like on the first day that he come to stay with us, when I kicked off my sneakers after a long day on my feet, which is what I used to do. And I'd be sitting down the lounge for a few minutes, resting, forgetting that the sneakers were in the middle of the walkway, which meant that Buster wouldn't know they were there because he couldn't see them, and they weren't there the last time he walked through during his mapping run. Needless to say, I was mortified to see him somersault over my sneakers out of the corner of my eye as he literally blindly walked into them. I felt like the worst pug mum in history, and yes, Andrew called me that as well when I told him what had happened. There's no punches held in this house. Thankfully, Buster was no worse for wear. He got lots of cuddles and kisses to make up for my laziness, and I now diligently make sure to not kick off my sneakers in the middle of the walkway anywhere. It's probably a good habit anyway. Now, the other piece of advice that surprised me during my research was about how important routine is for blind dogs. Now, I know that routine in general is good for dogs. It's definitely good for dogs with anxiety like Kenji, but Buster really does embody the need for routine. He barks me awake at 7 a.m. at the very latest, which basically means he's had a sleep in because it's usually 6 a.m. And for the last 2 mornings, it's been 4:30 a.m. So, and he does this so that I can take him outside for his morning constitutional. Rosie and Kenji pick and choose when they come with us. Sometimes they do, sometimes they have a sleep in. But no, for Buster, he has to go out at 6 o'clock in the morning. He also barks at 4 p.m. to remind me that it's time for afternoon eye drops, which includes a few treaties. And then he'll also bark at me at 6 p.m. for dinner if Rosie and Kenji haven't already started barking at me. You can see the routine here. I have my very own Buster alarm clock. Now, because I already had a routine for Rosie and Kenji's meals, sort of drugs, eye drops, and other things like consistent location of the water fountain, same place for dinner bowls every night, like it was easy to fold Buster into the general house routine. But Rosie and Kenji don't need a morning and evening constitutional. So that was something that I had to add to the household routine just for Buster. But to be honest, it's not that much of an imposition. Let's face it. If it ensures he doesn't toilet in the house overnight, then who am I to not add those two things to the household routine? Now, I have learned that a dog's main sense is their sense of smell, then their sense of touch, hearing, and finally, sight, which means losing their sight is not as big a deal for them as we might think it is. I've learned that not having sight has not stopped Buster from living the life he wants. Now, I don't know if this is different for other blind dogs/pugs, but I would assume that they too adapted without too many issues, especially if the loss of sight was gradual, which I kind of assume it was for Buster, noting that it was dry eye. So other than mapping the house out within days, to be able to walk around it like he's lived there for years, when it came to renovating our house earlier this year, he really did take it in his stride. We were really concerned. Now, the general advice for blind dogs is don't move your furniture unless you absolutely have to. But when you're renovating, you kind of have to, unfortunately. So we tried our best to keep sort of their beds in a central place throughout and to do regular toilet breaks, just so they had some dedicated time with me to feel safe, when there were tradies and things going through the house. Buster did stick to my side a little closer than normal, but so did Kenji, so I don't think that behaviour was blind pug specific. Interestingly, the thing that disconcerted Buster the most during the renovations, which included every room being painted, was the change in flooring. So Blind Pug Advice talks about providing different textured flooring, i.e. mats, to allow blind dogs the ability to differentiate different areas of the house, which is a great idea. So during the reno, we were walking on concrete in various parts of the house for 2 days whilst the flooring was being installed. And I could tell that Buster didn't like the feel or the smell of it. He was very discombobulated. There was a noticeable improvement in his demeanour once the new floorboards and very comfy carpet was installed. So another piece of general dog advice is to actually spend time in a room with them so they feel comfortable in the room and the room takes on sort of your and their smell, which is definitely important for a pug who is blind and deaf. Now, noting that we'd ripped up all the flooring, after it had all the new stuff had been installed, I put this into practice. So I sat in each of the rooms, just read a book or was on my laptop for an hour for the first couple of weeks so that they sort of had the ability to walk around, have a sniff, have a sleep, a bit of a play, just to sort of get their puggy smell and sort of I could also ensure that they didn't toilet anything. So the great thing was because they kind of lived in the spot, they were less likely to toilet on the carpet, especially. So far, so good with the carpet. We've only had 2 whittle incidents on the floorboards in the first couple of weeks, but I think that's a pretty good record by any standard, noting the amount of changes that were happening in the house over about a 2-month period. But I think probably one of my biggest lessons from Buster was actually when we started walking him. So amazing all the other things that we've already learned and done with him, but walking with him really was nothing that I've ever sort of experienced before. So walking a blind pug consists of slow, deliberate steps and stopping for lots of sniffs in the air, on the ground, over here, over there. And I kind of expected that. So that wasn't too bad. I initially walked in by himself so that I could watch him closely and track his sniffing and facial expressions. But after a few laps around the block, I started to walk in with Rosie and Kenji, and he seemed to like it more. So I can only assume it was more comfortable for him walking with familiar puggy smells around him as he got used to the smell and feel of the neighbourhood. Probably the one thing that challenged him the most was bin day. So much so that we actually avoid walking on bin day. And I think it's because there's too many smells and they just overwhelm him. Now, another thing that Buster used to do, which I had to watch for in the early days of his walks, was he would just stop dead in his tracks and not move. Now, no amount of ear scratches or pats or treats would get him to budge. He would just stop and just keep sniffing the air and just keep looking around. And it was all I could sort of see was he smelled something that he didn't like, and that just meant that was just a no-go for him. And not having the same sensory capabilities as him, I have no idea what it is that upset him, but he was so emphatic in his response. So pretty much what I had to do was, in these instances, I'd have to pick him up, give him a cuddle to reassure him, and then I'd walk down the path, sort of 10 to 15 meters, before I'd settle him down. And he'd just start walking again. It was as soon as we were clear of the smell, he was fine. And then, even more interestingly, the next time we would walk that path, like the next day or in a couple of days, he'd walk as though nothing had happened. So, whatever it was that caught his attention at that particular time, it wasn't permanent, or he felt so safe with me after the first time that he was happy to walk through it. And it just, thankfully, to be honest, it just didn't have a long-term effect on him, which was probably more the saving grace at this point in time. Luckily, he doesn't do it anymore. We've been walking, we keep to the same tracks. And so he's had 6 months of sort of getting used to the different smells. But I'll never forget that first couple of weeks where there was no budging him, no matter what. So, and sort of following on from that, so with a pug that's blind and going deaf, as you can imagine, teaching him obedience tricks or moves takes a little more thought. And since voice and hand commands don't really compute like they would do a dog that was one or the other, I have to say, I still say the commands out of habit. And I think it's good to talk regardless, but I really had to think about the touch signals that I wanted to use to communicate with him clearly so that we had some sort of basic but clear interactions. And sort of touch was the best way I thought that I could sort of start teaching him a couple of things. So far, I've taught him come and sit in a fashion, let's say. Now, when I want Buster to follow me, I stand in front of him and I tickle him under the chin quickly while saying come, so that he knows I want him to follow me forward. If I want him to move from one side to the other, I sort of tickle the side of the face just under his ear and I still say come. Now, he follows me most of the time and he'll do it for other people too. My stepdaughter tried it. She was really surprised that he actually did do it. So I think that it's a rather successful first obedience lesson. And it was the first thing that we tried to do within the first few weeks of him coming to live with us. So, and at that point in time, I was really happy that that was so successful. So after a few months, I got a little bit more daring and I thought, why not try and teach him how to sit, which is important when we're on walks and we come to a busy intersection. Rosie and Kenji sit. So I really wanted Buster to sort of have that same reaction, I suppose, when we come to a stop in an intersection and I need them to be paying attention. So I still use the command sit when I want him to. And so Rosie and Kenji will sit. But the difference is I then also reach over and I tap his bum near his tail with 2 fingers, sort of twice, to signal that I want him to sit. It was kind of, I thought 1 wasn't enough and 3 might be a little bit confusing. So we went with 2 and it seems to have worked. So the first few times I had to sort of do the 2 taps and then sort of gently push his bum down into the sitting position so that he correlated sort of the 2 taps on the bum that means bum on the ground. And he's picking it up really quickly. he doesn't get it every time. And sometimes he sees my hand reaching over his head and it's sort of it because he's got that light dark differentiation now. It does actually startle him a bit. So he does back off, which makes it really difficult to reach his bum. And in those instances, I just let him be. But he knows that like if he does feel that tap and he sits down, there's a treat in it for him. And so he's actually doing really well. I mean, the important thing is that he seems to like doing it and he's picking it up quickly when it works, which is great for a 12-year-old pug. But to be brutally honest, I think the reward's pretty good. And so in his mind, he's like, if I put my bum down, I get an extra treat on top of the treat that I would always get whenever we stopped at an intersection. So I told you, he's really intelligent. Now, amazingly, the biggest challenge I have when walking Buster is actually getting people to listen to me when I say he's blind and deaf, so approach slowly because too quick a motion startles him. I understand people get excited to see a pug, and let's face it, Buster is a gorgeous looking pug, but I just don't think they hear me. I have a blind dog tag on his lead and he has a bandana that also says I'm blind, but I've actually taken to stepping in front of Buster or putting my hand out to slow people's approach if Buster hasn't already walked up to their legs for a sniff, because it's really important that he's comfortable. And I can imagine that a hand shooting at your head is very disconcerting and a little frightening when you're not expecting it. So my general approach or my general advice for you is if you are approaching a blind pug, do it slowly and actually come from the side or underneath as opposed to overhead. Remember that dogs find hands, which to them are basically paws, on or around their head or the top of their head as threatening or aggressive. So they will flinch or back away if they sense something's there and they don't recognize it. And we don't want to do that to them. Now, interestingly, speaking of safety, another piece of blind dog advice I found in my research was that they need a safe space to call their own. To be honest, I don't think this is unique to blind dogs, but for Buster, his safe space is my walk-in wardrobe, under my long jackets and dresses, sleeping on the sheepskin that is their bed in our bedroom. Yes, they have multiple beds throughout the house. This is not the only place, but this is his preferred little pug cave, let's say. Now, if you didn't catch our story on our socials on Anzac Day a couple of weeks ago, we actually came home from dawn service to a Rosie Kenji greeting at the front door, but no Buster. Now, this is not unusual as he obviously doesn't see us and doesn't hear us come home, and he doesn't always follow Rosie and Kenji's movements around the house either. But we like to check in on him just in case something's happened whilst we're away and there's a reason for the no greeting other than the fact that he's fast asleep. So it took a while, but when we finally found him, all we could see was the lower half of his rump underneath my clothes, buried in the sheepskin in the corner of my walk-in wardrobe. Now, his fur blends beautifully in with the sheepskin. He was fast asleep and very comfortable. So we left him to his dreams in his little pug cave until he was ready to have breakfast. And of course, we posted on socials because it was so cute watching him snoozing away in his little pug cave. So those are all the things that I've learnt about Buster so far. But I am going to share some other tips that I found in my research that I haven't spoken about because we already do them with Rosie or Kenji, or they aren't really relevant to Buster, but are still important to be aware of if your pug is losing their eyesight or you're considering adopting a blind pug. So the first one is use scents, as in smells, during activities. And what they mean by this is get a Kong with peanut butter or a bacon-scented toy for them to sniff out, because it's a great way to keep them engaged and entertained. They can't see the toy and they can't hear the squeak, but they can still smell it. Now, for us, Buster doesn't care for toys, so we haven't used this technique with him, but he will rumble with Rosie and Kenji a little if he feels up to it. His favourite activity is actually going for a safari outside. So we try to do it every day, even if it's just to go to the nature strip. So we kind of adapted as I said, we've adapted what we do to suit his needs. Another piece of great advice is leave the TV or radio on. And I used to do this a lot for Kenji in the early days until his anxiety was under control. It's a great idea for them because it sort of helps them understand their home's layout. And it can actually help with loneliness and separation anxiety. So, sort of, when a pug comes into a room and they can hear the radio, they know that that's the living area or that's the bedroom or whatever it is. And so it just helps them out to get a handle of the layout of the home, especially in the first few weeks. Now, Buster's going deaf, so not much help for him, but he also has Rosie and Kenji to keep him company when I'm not around. So he's pretty much covered from a loneliness perspective. Another great piece of advice for blind dogs who obviously still have their hearing is choose toys that make a noise. So squeaky toys are great because it allows them to search it out, find it, and then play. So using really good use of their other sense, their sense of hearing and touch and all those things is really good. Now, another one is actually creating sounds around your house using bells or other easy noise creating items to help your blind pug recognize sort of the differences in volume and distance. Now, it works really well for pugs who are starting to lose their sight or they lose it suddenly and they're trying to adjust to their new reality. Sort of like hearing bells that they've associated with mum and that bell is in a different part of the house helps them to more quickly find you if they need to. So I thought it was a great piece of advice. Now, another one which we kind of do, but not to the same extent, is using textured rugs in your house. So we have specific mats at the doggy door and the backyard door so that the pugs don't slip when they come in with wet paws, but they know by the feel that they're allowed to go outside without needing to wait for me. Whereas the front door mat feels very different and they know not to run out without my say so. It's just another layer of help. The general advice is to use different textured mats and rugs around the house for your blind pug to use as a way of identifying the room or door. So it does mean that you need to really think about how you're going to implement that. So make sure that you've only got one type of rug in one part of the house and a different type of rug or mat or whatever you're going to use in another part of the house. And the last piece of advice, which is awesome, is trying a blind dog halo. Now, if you haven't heard of a blind dog halo before, it's a vest or a harness that has a metal or plastic ring that encircles the pug's head sort of from the side and around the front to help stop them from running into things whilst they become accustomed to their environment now that they're blind or going blind. We didn't need this for Buster as he's obviously already blind and he'd been blind for a while. So his other senses and instincts had already sharpened to accommodate his lack of sight. But we know of other pugs who've used them and their owners swear by them. There is nothing more heartbreaking than seeing your pug running into something because they haven't gotten the hang of it yet and they hurt themselves. So the investment is worth it for peace of mind alone. And there are some great options available on the market. So as of the recording of this podcast, as I said at the beginning, Buster is still available for adoption. He has some very specific needs due to his conditions, but if you're thinking of applying to adopt him, I recommend you read his adoption profile carefully before filling out the form. It's really important that you can not only meet his needs, but the house that you live in also meets those needs. And that can actually be a difficult marrying sometimes. Buster is a beautifully natured senior pug who's definitely made our lives more cuddly, if that's possible, and we are much better educated. Now, if you've met Buster at one of our events or a pug rescue event over the last 6 months, we'd love for you to share your experience and see your photos or videos over in our Facebook group, the Pug Life Show podcast. And if you're not a member of the Facebook group, I invite you to join now. And whilst you're there, let us know what you think of the podcast. We love getting free feedback. Sorry, we love getting all feedback, free or otherwise. And it helps make sure that we do better for you every season. Plus, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss out on the next episode. And while you're at it, leave us a review. It only takes a couple of seconds to give us a 5-star review, and it goes a long way to helping other pug parents find us. Rosie, Kenji, Buster, and I hope that you will join us again soon. So have a pawsome week, and humans, be generous with the snackies.